Welcome to Making Memoir Magic, the podcast where we unlock the power of your story and guide you through the magical process of turning life experiences into memoirs that inspire and impact. I'm your host, Carrie Kreisman, a memoir mentor and storytelling champion, and I'm here to help you find the courage to embrace your unique story and share it with the world. Whether you're just starting out or refining your final draft, this is the place to be for practical tips, inspiration, and the encouragement you need to write the memoir only you can tell. Ready to make some magic? Let's dive in. Welcome to Making Memoir Magic, the podcast for aspiring memoir writers who know they have a story to tell, but aren't always sure where or how to begin. I'm Carrie Kreisman, author of the memoir Accidental First Lady, and I am a memoir coach who believes that all of us have a story to tell. Whether we decide to tell it through memoir is up to us, of course. But if you are an aspiring author and you want to tell your story through memoir, I am your coach, and I am here to walk with you on this journey. I want to start off this week's episode with just a little story of a really cool occurrence that I had last week. I was featured on an Instagram account called Stories of Humanity. Go look it up. It's really, really awesome what Jenny is doing. She manages the account. The premises are simple of this Stories of Humanity. People answer questions about themselves, who they are, things others might not know about them, and experiences that have shaped them. At the end, I was asked to share a few words of wisdom, and mine were that it is never too late. So I didn't have to think very hard about that answer when she asked me, because I'm 58, and some of the most significant things that I have done in my life happened after I turned 50. I published my first book. I started my memoir coaching business. I began teaching other people how to write their stories. I survived ovarian and uterine cancers, experiences that led me into advocacy work on a national level. And none of those things were part of some carefully constructed plan for my 50s. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I meet so many people who want to write a memoir, but somehow convince themselves that they missed their moment. So maybe you've thought, I should have started this years ago. I'm too old to become an author now. I don't know anything about publishing. I've never considered myself a writer. Or maybe it's not age that is stopping you at all. Maybe you're thinking, who would want to read my story? Or maybe you're thinking, nothing extraordinary has happened to me. There are already books about what I would write about, or where would I even begin? So if any of those thoughts sound familiar, I want you to hear this. You haven't missed your chance. In fact, the life that you have lived may be exactly what makes you ready to write now. So the one thing that I do want you to know in your heart and in your soul, okay, is that memoir requires more than memory. People sometimes assume that memoirs are simply about remembering what happened, but they're not. If that were the case, we'd simply write down everything that has happened to us chronologically, starting with birth and continuing until yesterday. That is an autobiography, but memoir asks something different of us. Memoir asks, what did this experience mean? What did I believe then? What do I understand now? And how did it change me? What can I see from where I'm standing today that I couldn't possibly see while I was living through it? And that is why perspective matters so much. And perspective often takes time. So when you're standing in the middle of an experience, you're usually trying to survive it, solve it, enjoy it, or simply get through the day. You're not necessarily thinking about its meaning. It's only later that you can see the patterns when you've had time to reflect on the experiences and how the ones that stay with you share a common thread often. So you begin to understand why that relationship, for example, if that's what you're writing about, why it affected choices that you made afterward. You recognize what your mother's behavior taught you about becoming a mother yourself. You realize that losing a job wasn't only losing a paycheck, it changed how you understood your identity. So you see the thing you once considered your greatest failure redirected your life. So that is memoir. The event is what happened. The memoir is what you now understand about what happened. And that understanding doesn't arrive according to a particular birthday. So you don't have to be 50 to write a memoir. You don't have to be 60. You don't have to wait until you're 80. There are people who experience things at a young age that give them tremendous perspective. So sometimes, that happens to you. And if it does, it's recognizing the distance that time gives us from the experiences, no matter how old or how young you are. We begin to understand ourselves differently when we have the benefit of distance and time and perspective to look back on what happened and how we made sense of those things and where the story lies and what the major theme is within the story you're trying to tell. So when we look at ourselves differently after living through something or through a period of our life, sometimes we look back with compassion, with more honesty, and sometimes we have the ability to finally say, now I understand. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that you're understanding how memories and perspective and distance between your experiences and your writing can all form a cohesive unit, if you will, that is your catalyst to writing your memoir. But there's other reasons that you might not begin your memoir. If you're sitting there thinking, I know I want to write something, but I just can't begin. It's something that I like to say. Ordinary doesn't mean insignificant. I prefer to view the seemingly ordinary parts of our lives as extraordinary. There's extraordinary moments that exist within the ordinary. And people who think that everything needs to be extraordinary as a prerequisite to writing, those are the ones that often don't begin their memoirs because they don't think their lives are interesting enough. This comes up constantly with students that I work with. And they think sometimes that memoirs belong only to celebrities, that they have the right and the skill set, if you will. And it's simply not true. Maybe they think you must have been a politician and have served in public office and been on a ballot and had that kind of notoriety in order to write your memoir. Not true. Maybe you need to have survived an extraordinary circumstance. Not true. There are people that we will never know who survive extraordinary circumstances every day. And they either choose to write about it or they don't. There's not a right or wrong. But you don't need to have survived an extraordinary circumstance. Sometimes people who want to write a memoir but don't start or don't think their story is worthy enough think that they need to have a recognizable name, like a platform, so to speak, like be a household name. Nope, not true. Okay. I can tell you, I have read memoirs where I walked into the bookstore just browsing and I didn't know that author's name who wrote the memoir before I walked in that store. Okay. And I know there's people who have read mine who didn't know me. Something about it piqued their interest because I know that because then they wrote to me with a comment or they reviewed it on social media, like on Amazon or something. That's how I know. And that's one of the beautiful parts is that you don't know who your story is going to reach and who it's going to touch. So that makes memoir so valuable because the experience is human. All right. Maybe your story is about divorce or motherhood or caring for an aging parent. or growing up in a complicated family, or changing careers, or losing someone, or recovering from something, or living between two cultures, finding faith, losing faith. I'm listing a lot of topics here, but you get the gist. So maybe your memoir is about a marriage that lasted. Memoir doesn't always have to be induced by trauma either. A divorce is traumatic. And sometimes a memoir can be about a marriage that was successful. And why was it? What were the stories and struggles that a couple endured that made their marriage successful to them? Okay, that's where the experience becomes unique to them, not the definition of successful. So, like, for example, my memoir was about life as a political spouse for 22 years. So, my experience is not everyone's. My choices were not right or wrong or everyone's. They were mine. And my story was how I navigated things that were different to me because life was lived in the public eye. The experiences themselves weren't so unique, but when you deal with something like a tragedy, a house fire like we had, or cancer like I had, you can't always deal with it privately if your spouse or you is a public figure. So that is the lens from which my memoir was written. Think about what you want to write and think about the lens from which you're writing and how your experiences are shaped differently because of how you had to navigate. So, maybe your experiences do feel ordinary because you think millions of people have lived some version of them. But ordinary and insignificant are not the same thing. In fact, the shared human experiences are where the deepest connections begin. Your reader doesn't have to have lived your exact life to recognize themselves in your story. They just need to recognize an emotion that you share through your writing, or a longing, a fear, a mistake, a question, or a truth. So that is why I believe so strongly that ordinary people, if they want to, should write memoir, because our stories are part of the record too. Okay. And it takes courage to become visible. And that's what happens when you write a memoir. You are putting your story out for everyone and you are going to become visible. But writing a memoir also requires you to stop simply thinking of your story as just something that everyone goes through or is insignificant, and claim it. Claim your story. Honor what you lived through. So that for me has been a lesson in my own 50s. I was 51 when I published Accidental First Lady, and I was 53, 54, well, 53 and a half to be exact, when I started teaching memoir. And I remember wondering whether I really had the authority to do it, because there were people in the industry in that space who had been teaching writing for decades. They had different credentials. Now, I'd worked in writing for 30 years in some form or fashion through a newspaper career, a marketing, nonprofit work, but I was never a writing teacher, much less a memoir instructor. So I didn't have a big platform. I'd published one book. So who was I? Who was I to teach memoir? I asked myself that question. But you know what? I had my experience, and my unique experience set me apart, because there is always going to be someone who was just like me, just starting out, just doing it for the first time, asking themselves, who am I to write this? So I learned to answer that question differently. I said, who are you? I am the person who lived it. That was my answer. And that doesn't mean that every memory and every experience belongs in the book. And it doesn't mean that your first draft won't need work. And it certainly doesn't mean that remembering something automatically makes it compelling writing. Craft matters. Your writing does matter. The structure, the editing. Okay. But always, you are the authority on the experience that you have lived. The work is learning how to turn that experience into a story that allows someone else to enter it. So there's another reason that it's never too late those ending words on the Stories of Humanity video. Another reason why those words have become so important to me. During my 51st year, I was diagnosed with ovarian and uterine cancers. And nothing clarifies your relationship with time like confronting the possibility that you may not have as much of it as you assumed. So before cancer, someday could almost feel infinite. Someday I'll do that. Someday I'll try that. Someday I'll write that. Career or cancer changed that for me. It changed my relationship with someday. So I don't believe we need to live with the constant urgency or turn every day into some frantic pursuit of accomplishment. That's not the lesson. But the lesson is that if something matters deeply to you, endlessly postponing it is also a choice. So if you've been saying for 5 years, 10 years, maybe even 20 years, someday I'm going to write my story, I want you to consider that someday might be now. Not because you need to finish a book tomorrow, not because you need a publishing contract, and not because you need to announce on social media that you're writing a memoir. Just begin. Write one scene. Capture one memory. Give yourself 10 minutes in one day. Start discovering what the story might actually be about. And if you've been thinking of writing your memoir, here are 3 questions that I want you to consider. First, what experience from my life do I understand differently now than I did while I was living it? There's fertile ground for memoir. Second, what story do I keep returning to? Pay attention to the memories that won't leave you alone. There's usually a reason. And third, if someone saw herself or himself in my story, what would I hope that they understood? Not what advice would you give them. Memoir isn't a lecture. It is your story, and the lessons and messages will become inherent as you tell your story. What truth might your experience illuminate? Those 3 questions can begin moving you from, I want to write a memoir, toward understanding the memoir that you actually want to write. Now, there's something that I want to acknowledge. You can listen to this episode and think, okay, Carrie, you've convinced me my story matters. And then tomorrow you open a blank document and think, now what? That's where so many aspiring memoir writers get stuck. Believing your story is worth telling and knowing how to turn your life into a memoir are 2 different things. You still have to figure it out. So what's the central story? Where does it begin? What belongs and what doesn't? How do you structure it? How do you write scenes rather than simply report what happened? How vulnerable should you be? How do you keep going when self-doubt inevitably shows up? Those are skills, and skills can be learned. And that's why I created my course, Make Memoir Magic. I designed it for the aspiring memoir writers who are tired of saying, someday I'm going to write my memoir, but need guidance, structure, and support to actually begin. In my course, we work through finding the heart of your story, identifying what belongs in your memoir, creating structure, developing your voice, writing with vulnerability, building a sustainable writing practice, and moving forward without waiting for perfection. Because I don't believe the answer to I've always wanted to write a memoir should be maybe someday. I believe it should be I'm writing it. I'm already doing it. I've started and I'm going to finish. So I will put information about Make Memoir Magic in the show notes if you'd like to learn more. And whether you join me there or begin on your own, I want you to leave today's episode remembering this. You are not behind. Your age is not evidence that you've missed your chance. The years you've lived aren't something you need to overcome before becoming a writer. They may be precisely what gives you something worth saying. You have memories. You have perspective. You have questions that you've spent answering. You have experiences you understand differently today than you did when you lived them. That's material, that's meaning, and that's memoir. So if you've been waiting for permission to begin, consider this your invitation. You don't need to know the whole story yet. You don't need to know how it ends, and you don't even need to call yourself a writer. You just have to start. because it's never too late to become visible, and it's never too late to use your voice, and it's never too late to write the memoir only you can write. So I'm Carrie Kreisman, and this is Making Memoir Magic. And I appreciate you listening today. I am glad that you are in my community. If this resonated with you, share a review, give me 5 stars. I would love it. I would be honored. And if you know someone who would appreciate hearing this message, share this podcast with them. And as always, keep writing, keep believing in your story, and keep making memoir magic. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Making Memoir Magic. I hope today's conversation inspired you to take the next step toward telling your unique story through memoir. Remember, your story matters and someone out there is waiting to read it. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find the show. You can also connect with me on my website at carriekreisman.com, on Instagram at carrie.kreisman, or join my Facebook group, Memoir Magic for Aspiring Authors. You'll get more tips and inspiration on your memoir journey. And each Wednesday, I host a Memoir Magic write-in where you get to join other writers to accomplish the often arduous task of getting words on the page. Until next time, keep writing, keep sharing, and keep making memoir magic.